In this video, we will restore the glorious place of Africa in the Bible and the divine plan for Africa. And we will end the video with another credible and coherent version of the so-called Noah drunkenness after the flood narrated in the Bible. Now, the central argument rests on questioning the arbitrary racial divisions often projected onto the biblical text. If one follows the logic of the genealogy in Genesis, the Table of Nations, the idea of a radical phenotypical rupture between the brothers, Ham, Shem, and Japheth, is biologically improbable. Genetic continuity, Noah's heredity. The premise is simple. Physical characteristics do not emerge from nothing. If the descendants of Ham, particularly through Cush, often associated with Ethiopia and Mizraim, Egypt, are historically and textually recognized as having melanodermic, black traits, this necessarily implies that this genetic heritage was present in Ham himself. By extension, Noah, being the sole source of the repopulation of the earth according to the biblical narrative, carried these traits within himself. It is therefore illogical to portray the ancestor as white while acknowledging the complexion of his offspring. The racial unity of Noah's family challenges the 19th century Eurocentric vision that attempted to separate races into rigid categories. Family homogeneity, Shem, Ham, and Japheth came from the same parents. The idea that one brother would be radically different from another racially is a modern construct. The case of Shem. If Ham is black, his full brother Shem likely shared the same identity and physical appearance. This places the Semitic lineages, from which the Hebrews descend, within the same chromatic spectrum as the Hamitic lineages. If Shem is Ham's brother, his identity and physical appearance must be consistent with that of the family. The biological unity of Noah's family requires a revision of our iconographic representations. The physical identity of Cush, Ethiopia, and Mizraim, ancient Egypt, is not an isolated mutation, but a reflection of the ancestry of Ham, and consequently of the lineage of Shem and Noah himself. By recognizing the Africanness of Ham's descendants, we must logically acknowledge the melanodermic unity of the post-flood family nucleus, thereby repositioning the origins of biblical civilization within an authentic Afro-Asiatic context. At the ancient sources of Ethiopian faith, a spiritual, historical, and biblical reading. For centuries, many narratives have circulated concerning Ethiopian faith. Some teachings, often derived from late Western interpretations, claim that Ethiopia adopted so-called foreign religions, particularly Judaism and Christianity. These claims have sometimes served, consciously or unconsciously, to erase the place of Ethiopia specifically and Africa more broadly from the history of Abrahamic faith. Yet when we return to ancient biblical sources, antique traditions, and early manuscripts, a very different story emerges. Enoch, Noah, and the transmission of divine knowledge. The Bible teaches that Enoch is the seventh generation from Adam. Noah is the great-grandson of Enoch. This lineage is not insignificant. It testifies to a continuous spiritual transmission. Enoch, described as one who walked with God, did not experience death like other men. His life embodies an intimate relationship with the Creator and profound spiritual knowledge. In certain European traditions, Enoch is sometimes called Enoch the Ethiopian. This designation, though symbolic and often misunderstood, highlights an ancient link between Enoch's wisdom and the peoples of the south. However, Enoch was not Ethiopian in the modern geographic sense. He belonged to a humanity still unified before the dispersion of nations. Noah, the direct heir of this wisdom, preserved the teachings of his great-grandfather Enoch and passed them on to his sons and descendants. Thus, Enoch's spirituality did not perish with him. It passed through the flood. Ham and his sons, foundations of the ancient nations. Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Genesis records that Ham had 4 sons, Cush, Mizraim, Put, and Canaan. Cush is recognized as the founder of the territories corresponding to Ethiopia and Sudan. Mizraim is the origin of ancient Egypt. Put is associated with regions of the Horn of Africa, particularly Somalia. Canaan is linked to the territories that would later become Israel. Thus, Africa is not peripheral to biblical history, it is its cradle. The descendants of Ham, particularly those of Cush, directly received the spiritual inheritance transmitted by Noah, himself heir to Enoch. This is why it is not surprising that Ethiopia preserved the book of Enoch, an ancient text mentioned in the New Testament, Jude 1:14-15, but excluded from the Western biblical canon. In Ethiopia, this book was never considered foreign. It is viewed as ancestral heritage. The Ethiopian Bible and ancient books. The Ethiopian Bible contains several works rejected during Western canonization: the Book of Enoch, the Book of Jubilees, and others such as the books of the Maccabees. These texts did not disappear in Ethiopia because the spiritual tradition there was already firmly established before Western councils. Thus, claiming that Ethiopia adopted Abrahamic faith late is an incomplete reading of history. The Queen of Sheba and King Solomon, a meeting, not a conversion. It is often taught that Ethiopia embraced Abrahamic faith following the union of the Queen of Sheba and King Solomon. This idea deserves nuance. Before her visit to Jerusalem, the Queen of Sheba already knew ancient writings, the Book of Enoch, the Book of Jubilees, and other texts inherited from her ancestors. She did not come to discover God, but to test Solomon's wisdom. The union between Solomon and the Queen of Sheba did not introduce a foreign faith into Ethiopia. It strengthened an already existing bond. The descendants of this union still exist today, bearing witness to historical continuity from Adam to the present. Israel in Egypt, a biblical and historical argument. A powerful argument lies in the frequent confusion between the descendants of Shem and those of Ham. When Joseph, a Semite, becomes prime minister in Egypt, his own brothers do not recognize him among the Egyptians, Hamites. Likewise, Moses is mistaken for an Egyptian by the daughters of Jethro, Exodus 2:19. If Semites had been radically different in skin color from Egyptians, black, such confusions would have been impossible. Moses and the Ethiopian woman. The Bible reminds us that Moses took an Ethiopian woman as his wife, Numbers 12:1. This event, often minimized, reveals another reality. The spiritual and familial union between Israel and Africa already existed at the heart of Mosaic history. Moses was a Levite, and so were his children. The descendants of this union transmitted a priestly lineage whose branches still exist in Ethiopia today. Once again, spirituality was not imported into Africa, it was already circulating there. When the New Testament mentions the Ethiopian official baptized by Philip, some see this as Africa's first spiritual contact with biblical faith. Yet this minister was returning from Jerusalem, where he had gone to worship. He was not a stranger to this faith, but a sincere worshipper of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. If he did not understand a passage from Isaiah, he was not alone. Even in Jesus' time, these prophecies raised questions. God sent Philip not to introduce a new faith, but to reveal the fulfillment of that prophecy in Jesus Christ. Upon returning to Ethiopia, the minister transmitted this understanding, and the people recognized Jesus as the Messiah announced by Isaiah. Thus, worship of the biblical God was not new in Ethiopia. Only the messianic revelation was added to an already ancient faith. Ethiopia in the Psalms and the prophets. Even in the Psalms, God clearly references Ethiopia. Psalm 68:31 states, "Princes shall come out of Egypt. Ethiopia shall soon stretch out her hands unto God." This verse does not speak of a rebellious people, but of a nation rising for God, obedient, faithful, and conscious of its spiritual calling. Africa is not merely a mission field, it is the source. Psalm 87:4 also mentions a man said to have been born in Ethiopia, emphasizing the nation's spiritual importance in the divine plan. In Amos 9:7, God declares that the children of Israel are to him like the children of the Ethiopians. It is striking that God does not compare Israel to Greeks or Romans, but to Ethiopians, granting them particular spiritual value. The story of Noah, a rereading in light of ancient manuscripts. The Western narrative of the so-called Curse of Canaan has long been used to justify the enslavement of African peoples. Yet this story raises many questions. A spiritual and coherent reading of the post-flood narrative. It is difficult, spiritually and rationally, to accept without question the canonical version of the Noah story in which he appears drunk, naked, and exposed to shame. This reading presents Noah as a fallible man dominated by his instincts, even though the scriptures explicitly state he was a righteous man, perfect in his generation. Such a contradiction calls for a deeper rereading. Ancient manuscripts, notably the Dead Sea Scrolls discovered in 1947, as well as Ethiopian manuscripts, offer a significantly different version, more consistent with Noah's spiritual rank. According to these sources, after the flood, Noah did not indulge in excess but entered a process of sacred reconstruction. He planted wheat and the vine, symbols of labor, time, and patience. Years passed before the harvest. The bread and wine were therefore not products of impulse, but the fruit of a completed cycle, a sign of spiritual maturity. When the wine was ready, Noah did not organize a profane feast, but a celebration of thanksgiving. The bread and wine became offerings, not objects of intoxication. This gesture fits into a prophetic continuity. Melchizedek would later offer bread and wine to Abraham, and centuries later, Jesus Christ would institute these same elements as signs of the covenant. Before the communal meal, Noah performed a central act. He took the bread and wine and entered the ark alone, now sanctified by the divine presence. The ark, which was an instrument of salvation, became a sacred place, a space of encounter between man and the Creator. Noah immersed himself in deep, prolonged prayer, to the point that his family became worried. Ham, his first son, was sent to check on him. Upon entering the ark, Ham did not catch his father in a shameful situation, but saw him face to face with the Spirit of God. When the Spirit withdrew, Noah said to Ham, "You have seen the truth with your naked eyes. Go now and announce it to your brothers." This phrase is essential. The expression naked eyes refers neither to physical nudity nor to moral fault. It designates natural eyes as opposed to spiritual eyes. Ham was a direct witness to a divine reality. He thus became the first messenger after the flood, not through transgression, but through mission. In this reading, the story regains its meaning. Noah remains righteous and faithful to his calling. The ark becomes a sanctuary. The bread and wine take on a prophetic dimension, and Ham is no longer a culprit, but a bearer of testimony. Understood this way, this story teaches neither shame nor curse, but transmission, the distinction between spiritual vision and carnal perception, and the continuity of the divine plan through human history. Ethiopia is not a late missionary field, but a land of memory, transmission, and fidelity. The faith of the God of Adam, Enoch, Noah, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob was already alive there long before Western narratives. To understand this is not to rewrite history, it is to restore it.